100 Years War and Joan of Arc soar. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is September 14th, 2020. And on this date in history, oh my God, William McKinley was just shot in Buffalo, New York. And now he lays dying. And then he died. By the way, that was 119 years ago.
So today we'll start our little geography part of the lesson. It's only going to be part of the lesson for one more class, and then we'll touch on a little bit, but just to try and explain the different regions. This has to do with the oil export routes in the Caucasus area. Okay, so you can see some of the pipelines here go through, well, part of Russia, and they kind of go through Turkey as well. And this is how they get a lot of oil out of the Middle East and into the trade routes of the for the United States and for all of Europe. Okay, and you can see the concentration of where all the oil fields are. Population distribution and growth. You can see that the most amount of people are in northwestern Europe. It's much more densely populated than Eastern Europe, and the population growth isn't as high in those areas, although, okay? You can see that Germany is pretty high in population growth, and Italy, and Sweden, Romania, and Hungary. So even though those aren't the most populous areas right now, they should become so as the future continues. And you can also see on both the map on the left and the map on the right that Spain isn't very populated right now, and they have a very low population increase. And France's population's been going down since the end of, since really the end of World War One. You also have a large influx of population from the Middle East moving into Europe, and it's getting close to the point where maybe in the next 50 to 100 years, the France will be a mainly Arabic state. Indo-European language family, as you can see, a lot of it's based on Latin in the south. You have Spain and Portugal, both derivatives of Latin. Same thing with France and Italy and Romania as well. As you move further north, there are much more Germanic languages between Norway, Sweden, Germany. Even English, to a great extent, is Germanic. It also has traces of Latin in it, but it's closer to German than it is to to Latin or French or Spanish. On the eastern side of Europe, you have more of a Balto-Slavic language. Okay, and down at the very tip, you can see Albanian and Greek. Major religious groups. Now, if we're looking back to around the year 1450 when this class starts, everyone is just Catholic. Okay, and you can still see the majority of Europe is still Roman Catholic. But as you go farther north into parts of Germany, Norway, Sweden, and Finland, they're all Lutheran. England is still with the Anglican Church, as they've been since the 1550s. And most of the peninsula that Greece is located on, they are Eastern Orthodoxy. Okay, that's their major religion. Now you do have some spots of that same peninsula that are Islamic as well, but for the most part, some variety of Christianity controls the religion of most of Europe. By the way, Russia is also an Orthodox religion, but they're the Russian Orthodox Church. A few differences between them and the Greek Orthodox Church. This is a completed map of all the different regions of Europe. We've already looked at most of these, but I thought I'd put it all together in a way that was very difficult to read, and it seemed like a much better idea whenever I put this together than it does now. But it's my waste of time, I guess. Okay, so the Jacquerie Revolt. This is fought outside of Paris over a tax called the toll. The toll was a tax that everyone had to pay unless you were rich. So basically, all the poor people had to pay this tax, but if you were a member of the church, if you were part of the nobility, and if you owned a certain volume of land, then you did not have to pay it. So this took place in France, just in case. I think I mentioned that just a moment. Okay, around the same time in England, you also have a revolt of the workers. Okay, it was called the Statute of Laborers. In 1351, they tried to reduce all the wages back to what they were before the bubonic plague. The bubonic plague really raised wages because there was a shortage of workers. And so England tried to artificially do that because they didn't want all the riches of the wealthy to end up in the hands of the poor. So what better way to do that than to say, we won't pay any more than this, and it's a national thing. Uh, Also, at this time, they tried to institute feudalism to the point where it would remain, and you had control over the people. So at this point, the serfs were not allowed to leave the land of their masters. So the Wat Tyler Rebellion in 1381, the peasants attacked London over a poll tax and were crushed. So nice try. Okay, so art in the Black Death. Most of the great painters and art guilds were all wiped out by the bubonic plague, and so you had a new style of art that came out from the region, and or came out as a result of the bubonic plague, and it all focused on pain and death because that's how most people saw the world right after a massive pandemic. Okay, it's not like us who, we had to endure, being at home with Netflix. You know, these people had nothing to do. Most of them were illiterate, and so whenever they did try and put people into quarantine, you sat around the house and you did pretty much nothing, and you might die of starvation because you didn't spend enough time out tending your land if there were other people in the area. Francisco Trani, he did the Triumph of Death. That is the picture up at the top, and I'll be honest, there's so much going on in this picture, it's a little bit overwhelming. Okay, there are people partying at a funeral. You can see the party over here to the left. Uh, you can also see the threat of death around them, and there's dead bodies everywhere. So, causes of the Hundred Years' War. The Hundred Years' War actually lasted over 100 years, but there were not many battles that were fought, so it's not a constant struggle for 100, I think, 13 years. Okay, so there were four main things that caused it. First, it had to do with the succession of the throne of uh, of France. Okay, so the French nobility wanted Philip of Valois, a cousin of the last king, uh, to be on the throne. King Edward III of England, his mom was the daughter of the king before, uh, Philip IV. He claimed the title of King of France, so he would have been King of England and France. There was also some controversy over some French land belonging to British kings. Uh, you can see it right there on the map on the left. Uh, Two different sections of land that were held by the English king. Okay, remember the English William the Conqueror came from France over to England, and he continued to hold his land even after he established the British throne. You also have a conflict over Flanders. Okay, was a large wool industry. Made a lot of money for well, whoever controlled it. Okay, it wanted its independence from France and wanted England to help them get their independence, and then they would have had they would have had certain rights and privileges with the English. By the way, British does not exist yet. There's no British people or Great Britain until 1707. You also have a struggle for national identity. Uh, at this time, there were a lot of small feudal kingdoms, and no one thought of themselves as French or English or anything along those lines. You were basically just part of whatever manor. You might have a language in common with your neighbors, but that didn't mean that you were in any way united. So the Hundred Years' War, 1337 to 1453, 116 years. This is between England and France. Okay, it is a turning point in warfare because a lot of the peasant armies on foot helped win important battles, and they had the longbow, which could shoot over longer distances and was a little bit more accurate. Okay, France had about 16 million people. They also had more money than England, and they also outnumbered England's army about 3-2. Uh, what really helped England throughout this entire battle was the fact that they never got trapped into large battles. They were always able to move into smaller skirmishes, so their numbers were never really taken advantage of. Okay, the longbow, as you can see right there, it's taller than a man, especially of that time period. Most of the people in Europe were somewhere around 5 feet, sometimes a little bit smaller than that. Okay, uh, England used it to defend areas, so anyone that came by, this bow had a lot of force, and it was a lot more accurate than what they had before. Uh, they did have the crossbow at the time, but the crossbow didn't have the power that they do today, and it could actually go uh, through the armor of a knight, and it could go through wood. So if you had any type of shield at the time, it could go right through it and do a lot more damage. You could also get off about 6 shots a minute that were pretty accurate. Okay, so it almost became the machine gun of the time. In England at this time, there was a peasant revolt, and it was stopped. So this caused some problems and some slowdowns in the kingdom. Parliament, this is a British Parliament. They elected Henry IV, and he avoided war taxes and tried not to alienate the nobility. And he signed a temporary treaty and made it easier to keep control. And as you can see on the map on the right, England really started to push into France and take over large areas of English control by about 1429. And a lot of that was done under Henry V, the son of Henry IV. So, so the Treaty of Troyes, okay? The Treaty of Troyes, the French King Charles VI's son, Charles VII, was declared illegitimate, okay? So he could not take the throne, okay? So British King Henry V married Catherine, the daughter of Charles VI, okay? So the King of England, his father-in-law, was the King of France. And at that point, he was declared the legal heir to the French throne. But then both Charles VI and Henry V died in 1422, causing chaos. Okay, and Henry's young son, who was a baby at the time, inherited both thrones, making things even more insane in a time whenever they were trying to find a way for peace. So, uh, this is the final steps or stages of the Hundred Years' War. Okay, uh, the British seem to be firmly in control of everything. They controlled almost all of northern France, and that also included Paris at the time. Okay, but The French were able to change everything due to the work and effort of a young Joan of Arc. So Joan of Arc, at a very young age, as a teenager, uh, she was having visions of God and God telling her to do certain things. And she was unique in the fact that she actually got to fight. It was very uncommon for women to fight. And the English said that she was able to do all of this and because she was not in communication with God, but with the devil. So she helps win major battles at Orleans. So if you ever wonder where New Orleans comes from, it comes from Orleans in France. And then they spent a lot of time coming up with a great name for the city in Louisiana, and that's where they came up with New Orleans. So a lot of time thinking and developing a name. Uh, the king was crowned at Reims after the Battle of Orleans, and but she was captured during an attack on Paris and was delivered into English hands, and part of it because there was a deal made with the French. Okay, she was condemned and burned at the stake as a heretic, so basically as a witch. So they burned her at the stake, but that also helped get the French back their crown. So uh, she really inspired the French army to help retake a lot of the land from Great Britain. And by 1450, England had lost all their major centers except for Calais. Okay, Calais is really in the area closest to England, and that'll play a major role in the Normandy invasion during World War II. They actually pretend like they're going to invade there because it's the closest point between England and France. There was really no treaty to end the war, and just everyone stopped fighting in 1453 whenever the French captured this really important English fortress. And at this point in time, France becomes unified, kind of in the shape that you know it from today. So, moving away from war into religion, which sometimes leads to war. During this time period, uh, this this theologian from Oxford University. Most of the universities in the world at this time were not like universities today. Most of the time, you went to study the ministry and move into some type of religious position. And during his time at Oxford, he started a movement to translate the Bible. And he also fought to take wealth out of the hands of the church because there were a lot of very wealthy members of the church, very wealthy ministers and priests. 30 years after he died, they declared him a heretic and all of his works were burned and banned. So if you have any of the translated works on paper written by either Wycliffe or his followers, that's worth a lot of money right now. So don't throw it away. If you're going to throw it away, just bring it to me and I'll make sure that I throw it away nice and delicately for you. Jan Hus on the right, he was a Czech follower of Wycliffe. Uh, that's an area to the south of Germany. It's now called the Czech Republic. Uh, he was against Catholic traditions and transubstantiation. Okay, transubstantiation is whenever it's believed in the Catholic Church that when you take communion, and communion's whenever you take some bread and some wine, and whenever you take that, it's supposed to represent the body and the blood of Christ. Well, according to transubstantiation, that the wine and the bread actually becomes the blood and the body of Christ. Janahas, because he said that this was not a real thing, he gets executed kind of violently by being burned at the stake. The Hussite Wars. This is actually started over Jan Hus. It was fought for about 16 years, where the Czechs fought the Hungarian king and the Holy Roman Empire, and they got independence for Czechoslovakia. Well, not Czechoslovakia, basically the Czech people of the time. Sorry, Czechoslovakia was the name of the country that was held by the Czechs and the Slovakians back uh, right after World War II, and in the 1990s it was separated into two separate nations. So that's why I made that error, and also I misspoke. Sometimes I do that, but I thought I'd talk about it enough so that you lose interest in my mistake. So I do make mistakes sometimes, and I try and just gloss over it so you can never tell what I did. Or there's other times where I'll bring it up for the rest of the year whenever I make a mistake. I don't know. Six of one and a quarter of 2 dozen of the other. Uh, this also, because the Czechs had their independence, they could also practice this faith of Jan Hus. So, oh, happy day. This leads us to the bibliography, okay? The last part of here. Uh, so, I hope everyone's having a great day, a great week. Hopefully, I'll get to see you in person here pretty soon. So, until then, peace and long life.